Lumen, or Latin for light, is the title of a piece by the Polish composer Marta Ptaszyńska. We're very happy to be presenting this piece, and I'm particularly happy personally because I was involved in its original commissioning and premiere. Through my work with a group called the Cleveland Chamber Symphony, we embarked on something called a public commissioning initiative, in which many people from throughout the community, for a nominal sum, were invited to participate in raising the money to pay for and support the commission from Marta. It's a wonderful way to feel ownership for a piece of music and to learn about its process of composition. Now, Marta chose a particular image, this idea of light, and she titled the piece Lumen from this Latin word. And in fact, she writes in a preface in the score, "Lumen is a work which represents in sound a phenomenon of the unfolding light, seen, for example, in a beam of light in a crystal prism. This luminous and radiant light is full of myriads of twinkling colors analogous to the colorful designs seen in a kaleidoscope or in stained glasses of the Gothic cathedrals. I was especially inspired by the magnificent stained glass in the windows of the cathedral in Chartres in France." It was a wonderful inspiration, and this analogy of the refraction of light through a prism, just like we see in a rainbow, is very much a part of the way Marta writes for the orchestra, where we hear individual sounds blending together in different ways, sometimes featured on their own, but always having this extraordinary sense of color. I'd like to give just a few examples from this piece of music so you'll have an idea of what to listen for when you hear it this Saturday night. At the very opening of the piece, we hear a very sharp chord played in the piano and a thunderous kind of pizzicato in the cellos and basses. And we gradually hear a melody. It's a little angular, but it forms the basis of most of the material for the entire piece. And as we hear that melody kind of unfold, we hear the orchestra open up until gradually we're hearing everyone, and it's as if suddenly that light has opened up through the prism. In our next excerpt, we'll hear how Marta puts together particularly the brass instruments and the percussion instruments. The percussion are kind of echoing, giving extra little punctuation to the unfolding sound of the brass. At the end of that excerpt, we heard the strings coming in with a particularly kind of ethereal sonority. And again, the use of the percussion instruments. And I want to talk about that for a minute. First of all, Marta is a percussionist. This was how she began as a performer and has stayed active as a performer through her career. So she's very aware of all of the coloristic possibilities from the percussion. And she expands that section. So we hear quite prominently in this piece the glockenspiel, an instrument called the crotales, which are kind of a relative of the glockenspiel. We have the vibraphone, the marimba, and joining in that sort of wonderful sense of bright, punctuated color, we also have the harp and the piano. This group of instruments functions throughout the piece as kind of a marker for different sections and a reawakening of those light-filled sonorities. Another particularly interesting aspect of the piece is how Marta uses this sort of collective improvisation technique. Much of it came from her teacher, the great Polish composer Lutosławski, but Marta gives it her own voice. And in this segment we're about to listen to, you'll hear individual players merging with each other. They have very specific lines written, but the coordination of them is really up to their own improvisatory character. We'll hear some interruptions from that great percussion group again. And we'll see this wonderful juxtaposition of these very large orchestral sonorities and the very focused percussive quality. There are some faster sections of this piece as well, and in this one we'll hear some kind of scampering woodwinds with pizzicato in the strings. The strings get higher and higher and louder, and there's this wonderful sense of activity as it builds to this climactic chord that interrupts it. As we get towards the end, we again have our friends, the percussion, bringing us, once again, forming this dividing line, bringing us into this final closing section. And the strings begin to play a kind of a threnody, really. It's a beautiful melody. It's drawn from the material at the very beginning of the piece, but now it's drawn out, it's expanded, and it's very hushed. She actually calls for mutes on the instruments, and they play this in a repeating manner for a period of time. Part of the idea of this commission was to pay tribute to a friend of ours, a composer who had died quite suddenly. And this was Marta's way of paying a tribute to our friend Dennis Eberhard. And this use of the strings creates this wonderful kind of melancholy and yet reflective and in a way almost hopeful nature for the process of life. That final section is indicative of the motto that Marta gives to this piece. It's a quotation from a poem by Dylan Thomas. "Light breaks where no sun shines." It's a wonderful metaphor. And when we imagine the sounds of the orchestra all merging together in this wonderful sense of colorful sonority that Marta's ear is so attuned to, we get a sense for the embracing of life in this entire piece. I'm really excited about being able to present this piece. It's a piece that's very, very close to me. I was there for the premiere, I conducted the premiere, and I've been wanting to bring it to our audiences here in Richmond for a number of years. So I'm really happy to have had a chance to introduce you to a bit of insight into how the piece is constructed, the kinds of sounds you'll hear, and look forward to seeing you at the concert.